33 years. That's all he was given. No more, no less. In just 3 decades, Jesus of Nazareth fulfilled prophecies older than empires, revealed the heart of God, and rewrote eternity. From a manager in Bethlehem to a wooden cross outside Jerusalem, every step of Jesus' life unfolded exactly as the Father intended. Not a single moment was accidental. Every word he spoke, every miracle he performed, every journey he took, all of it was part of a plan that had been set in motion before the world was formed. And yet the life of the Son of God lasted only 33 years. Not 40 years like Moses in the wilderness. Not the average biblical lifespan of 70 years. Only 33. Why so short for the most important life ever lived? That's the question we're about to answer. And the answer is not just about history. It's about you. It's about understanding that the same God who timed every detail of Jesus' life down to the day is the same God guiding the timeline of your life right now. We're going to open the scriptures and trace the divine calendar that shaped every moment of Jesus' time on earth. We'll look at prophecies written centuries before his birth, Old Testament laws that set the pattern for his ministry, and world events that created the perfect stage for his arrival. And we'll see that his 33 years weren't just enough, they were exact. Paul gives us our first clue in Galatians 4 verse 4. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. That phrase, the fullness of time, doesn't just mean the right century or the right year. It means the precise moment when everything lined up according to God's design. Not a day early, not a day late. When Jesus was born, the world was in a unique state that had never happened before, and has never happened since. The stage was set in 3 remarkable ways. First, Rome ruled much of the known world. The Roman Empire stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. For the first time in centuries, there was an era of relative peace called the Pax Romana, Roman peace. This made travel safe and communication possible between distant regions. Roman roads connected city to city, making it easy for the gospel to travel quickly after Jesus' resurrection. Second, the Greek language united the nations. Centuries earlier, Alexander the Great had spread Greek culture and language far beyond its borders. By the time Jesus was born, Koine Greek was the common language of trade, understood by Jews, Romans, and Gentiles alike. This meant the New Testament could be written in a language the entire empire could read, breaking down cultural barriers before the gospel was even preached. Third, Israel was desperate. God's people had been under Roman oppression for decades. Heavy taxes weighed them down. There had been no prophetic voice for 400 years since the prophet Malachi. They clung to the promises of Scripture that a Messiah would come to deliver them. They were spiritually hungry, ready for hope. This was no random moment. Every detail matched what the prophets had foretold. The prophet Daniel had given a prophecy in Daniel 9 verse 25 that pinpointed the exact time the Messiah would appear. From the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Those weeks in prophecy represent periods of 7 years. Starting from the decree of King Artaxerxes of Persia in 445 BC to rebuild Jerusalem, the prophetic clock began ticking. Count forward according to Daniel's timeline, and it leads you straight into the lifetime of Jesus. It's as though God set a divine countdown clock in motion. And when it hit 0, the Son of God stepped into human history, born in a humble town, at the crossroads of prophecy, history, and eternity. Everything was ready. The world was prepared. The fullness of time had arrived. Why Jesus started at 30? Luke gives us a detail that might seem small at first glance. Now Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age. Luke 3 verse 23. Why 30? Was it just a random cultural choice? Or was there a divine reason? To find the answer, we have to go back to the Old Testament, to a time when God gave very specific instructions for those who would serve in the tabernacle. In Numbers 4:3, the law told Moses, from 30 years old and above, even to 50 years old, all who enter the service to do the work in the tabernacle of meeting. This meant no Levite priest could begin his official ministry until the age of 30. Before that, they could train, assist, and learn, but full service began only at 30. Why? Because 30 represented a season of maturity, strength, and tested character. By then, a man had lived enough life to carry spiritual responsibility without collapsing under its weight. Jesus didn't just come as a Messiah. He came as our great high priest, Hebrews 4 verse 14. That means his life had to align perfectly with the priestly patterns God set in the law. If he had started preaching at 25 or 27, he would have been out of sync with the very law he came to fulfill. But at 30, He stepped into his role exactly as the pattern required, not a year too early, not a year too late. And this age wasn't significant only for priests. It was a launching point for many of God's chosen leaders. David became king of Israel at 30, 2 Samuel 5 verse 4. Joseph rose from prison to rule Egypt at 30, Genesis 41 verse 46. Ezekiel received his first prophetic vision at 30, Ezekiel 1 verse 1. In the biblical mindset, 30 was the threshold, the moment when a person was fully ready to walk in their God-given destiny. It was the age of stepping into authority. So when Jesus came up from the Jordan River after his baptism, the Spirit descending on him like a dove, the Father's voice thundering, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," he wasn't just having a powerful spiritual experience. He was officially stepping into his appointed time. It was as if he was saying to the world, "I have reached the hour my Father set for me. I am ready to serve as your king, your prophet, and your high priest." From that moment, the clock on his public ministry began to tick, and it would run for exactly 3.5 years, no more, no less. That number, 2, was no accident. It had been written into prophecy long before Bethlehem ever saw the star. When Jesus stepped into the waters of the Jordan River to be baptized by John, it wasn't just a public moment of faith, it was the exact prophetic moment when his ministry clock began ticking. From that point forward, every sermon, miracle, and journey he made was moving toward one divine deadline. The prophet Daniel, centuries earlier, had written of a specific timeline in Daniel 9 verses 24 to 27, a prophecy so precise that it predicted not just the year, but the very season of the Messiah's ministry. Daniel spoke of 70 weeks, symbolic weeks of years, with one final week set apart for the coming of the Anointed One. In the middle of that final week, Daniel said, the Messiah would be cut off, ending the sacrificial system and confirming a new covenant. That middle was exactly 3.5 years in. And that's how long Jesus' public ministry lasted. From his baptism in the fall of AD 27 to his crucifixion at Passover in the spring of AD 31. We see a perfect span of 3.5 years, fulfilling Daniel's words down to the season. This wasn't random timing. God's calendar was in motion, and every festival, every prophetic number, every historical moment pointed straight to the cross. Even the way Jesus often said, "My time has not yet come," shows he knew the countdown was real. The cross could not come a day too soon or a day too late. It had to land exactly where prophecy placed it. And when the moment arrived, he stepped into it willingly, knowing heaven's clock had struck the appointed hour. The last week of Jesus' life wasn't just a tragic chain of events. It was the exact fulfillment of a divine timetable set in motion over 1,000 years earlier, through the Feast of Passover. Every detail, from the day he entered Jerusalem to the moment he breathed his last, lined up perfectly with the ancient patterns God had built into Israel's most sacred festival. Passover, first given to Moses in Exodus, was God's way of pointing forward to the ultimate sacrifice. In Egypt, the Israelites were told to select a spotless lamb on the 10th day of the first month. They kept it under watch for 4 days to ensure it had no defect, and on the 14th day, they slaughtered it at twilight. Its blood on their doorpost was a sign that spared them from judgment. Now fast forward to Jesus. On the exact day the Passover lamb was chosen, the 10th of Nisan, he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, hailed by the crowds as king. For the next 4 days, he was examined by the religious leaders, political authorities, and even Pilate himself. Just like the lamb, they found no fault in him. And then, on the 14th day of Nisan, as lambs were being slain in the temple, Jesus was nailed to the cross. The true Passover lamb was giving his life for the sins of the world at the exact hour the priest was sacrificing the lambs. It wasn't a coincidence. It was precision. Even the manner of his death carried the prophetic shadow. None of his bones were broken, just as the Passover lamb's bones could not be broken. His blood was poured out, not on wooden door frames this time, but on the wooden beams of the cross, marking a new covenant. From the moment he entered the city to his final cry, "It is finished," every action, every date, every symbol declared one thing. God's plan had been kept to the letter. The shadow had given way to the substance. If the cross was the climax of prophecy, then the resurrection was its triumphant finale. And just like every other moment of Jesus' life, even the day he rose was not random. It was set in the law of Moses over 1,000 years before. The Feast of First Fruits was an ancient celebration held the day after the Sabbath following Passover. On that morning, the high priest would present the very first sheaf of the spring harvest before God, symbolizing that more harvest was coming. It was a promise that if the first was accepted, the rest would follow. Now watch this. Paul calls Jesus the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep, 1 Corinthians 15 verse 20. On the exact morning the priest lifted that first sheaf in the temple, Jesus stepped out of the tomb alive. He was the first of a new kind of humanity, resurrected, glorified, and never to die again. This wasn't a poetic coincidence. It was a divine schedule. His resurrection wasn't just proof of his power. God guaranteed that everyone who belongs to Christ will be raised just like him. The Feast of First Fruits wasn't just about grain. It was about the greatest harvest of all, the souls of the redeemed. Everything lined up perfectly. Passover for his death, unleavened bread for his burial, and first fruits for his resurrection. Every detail, every date, every shadow in the Old Testament found its fulfillment in him. When you step back and see the full picture, it's breathtaking. Every moment of Jesus' life, his birth in Bethlehem, his public ministry, his death on Passover, and his resurrection on the Feast of First Fruits, was like a series of perfectly placed puzzle pieces. None of it was accidental. It was a divine calendar unfolding exactly as God had written it long before time began. The precision of these events also gives us a clue about what's still ahead. The first coming of Christ fulfilled the spring feasts to the exact day. That leaves the autumn feasts, trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles, still unfulfilled in his second coming. If God kept time so flawlessly in the past, we can be sure he will do it again. The Feast of Trumpets may point to the gathering of God's people, atonement to the day of final judgment, and tabernacles to the time when God will dwell among us forever. These aren't random guesses. They are patterns God has already set in motion. The takeaway is simple but life-changing. God is never late, never early. He works with perfect timing, and that timing always carries purpose. The same God who orchestrated the exact day of Jesus' arrival, death, and resurrection is guiding history right now toward its next appointed moment. That means we're not drifting in chaos. We're moving toward a set date on God's prophetic calendar, a day when history will climax, just as he planned from the beginning. The question is, are we living ready for it? And here's the part that should shake us. If God can orchestrate the rise and fall of empires, align heavenly signs, and time the death and resurrection of his Son down to the very hour, then he is more than capable of working out the details of your life. Your delays aren't accidents. Your breakthroughs aren't random. There is a divine calendar, and your name is written on it. The question is, are you living in step with his timing, or are you rushing ahead on your clock? The same Jesus who rose on schedule is coming back on schedule. And when he does, there will be no extensions, no rescheduling, no warnings beyond the ones you've already been given. So, live ready, live surrendered. And if this truth stirred something in you today, don't just let it fade. Share this message, let others see the beauty of God's perfect plan, and make sure you're walking in it. Because the story of Jesus' perfect timing isn't finished yet. You're here, in this generation, for a purpose. God has counted your days, not to restrict you, but to fill them with meaning. Live as if every day matters, because it does. Love deeply. Serve with faith. Obey without hesitation. If this message has touched you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs encouragement. Tell us in the comments what spoke to your heart, and subscribe for more Bible-based teachings to strengthen your faith. Remember, God's timing is never late, never early, always perfectly on time.